Hi, this is Jen Rubin, editor-in-chief of The Contrarian. If it's Monday, it must be Pablo Torre.
It's 2025 or the last gasps of it, Shen. So thanks for having me back
Exactly.
one more rodeo this strange year.
Absolutely. And we couldn't start anywhere else without talking about your year. You had an extraordinary run of investigative pieces and stories and reporting. Did you go into sports reporting thinking of yourself as an investigative reporter?
It wasn't the mission of the show. The mission of the show was really to launch my version of a magazine because I came from Sports Illustrated and ESPN the magazine, neither of which either exist or exist in the same way anymore. And so, not especially. But then once you sort of commit to journalism as the methodology for how you tell stories, which is what I did as a magazine writer, you sort of begin to realize that there is a desert of, frankly,
Yes.
accountability in sports at this very same moment when sports, as we have talked about all year, has never been more culturally potent or economically rich or fascinatingly dysfunctional. And so the lens that I saw everything through was journalism. The impetus, the real reason why I'm doing all of this in this way is because I just realized that we need this and that it's also fun. And so it's kind of not the plan, but it's now the job.
Like at the contrarian, you find out that there is a hunger for something people aren't getting, and that is the connection you make with an audience. Of the many stories that you've broken, whether it's Bill Belichick, whether it's betting stories, whether it's the players scandal in the NFL, what do you think was the hardest for you to kind of get your hands around, the hardest to get into and get the facts on?
Yeah, every story is kind of like a Fabergé egg to me, and you handle it very
Yeah.
delicately, and you hope that people appreciate it as much as you put all this detail into it. The Aspiration Clippers story, though, there are other, I think, contenders reasonably, if you feel differently, for what was most important. But that one, anytime you have to make a decision about whether you, as an independent journalist, is going to go after one of the 10 richest people in the world over something that he actively wanted no one else to know about, it is a bit of a just like crossroads in a career. Like I
Yeah.
had done the NFL and NFLPA stories, and we've talked about labor law and union organizing, and that is so important to me in a different way. But this one felt like uh, it felt like a real test of our cojones. You know, like, do we really want to get into this with this guy? And it took 7 months, and again, like 3,000 pages of documents, and we're on to, I think we're at 6 parts now. And there will be, I will break this news on your show. There will be a seventh in 2026. We're not done. We're not close to done, honestly. And so for that reason, that one felt like the lesson also of if you tell a story, as you put it, in a way that feels human and needed, and you also melt the cheese on it, right? You make it fun, then you realize that people also begin to see this as a multi-part unfolding, which is to say we're
Right.
kind of getting people to be intrigued by the process as well as the
Yes,
result. And for
absolutely.
me, man, it's just one of the things that I think about all the time now is how journalism generally has been very bad at selling itself to a population that is now predisposed to not trust it. And perhaps
Yes.
even worse, to think it's boring, like we're here to scold people. And what I've discovered is that, to your point, people are starving for reporting, and you just got to present it in a way that feels like it is inviting them in, as opposed to telling them that they should do something, when the real answer is they should want it also.
Yes. And I think you really have changed sports journalism. You look at the number of stories that you were there first, and then other people have followed. It's hard not to see that you've kind of woken folks up. And that was part of our reason for starting the Contrarian and the
Right.
wonder of independent journalism. It's not to destroy legacy journalism, it's to make them better, it's to make them competitive, to give them the fire in the belly.
Yeah, there's this. terrible logic that people have sort of leaned on as technology, as the internet, broadly speaking, has eaten media, which is that people will only desire the most, lowest common denominator
Right.
kind of content, and everything is now content. I will make reluctant peace with that premise, but it does not mean that you need to just feed people stuff that they've seen before that everyone else is doing. Like, I think that when it comes to the opportunity for independent journalism now, it should be a wake-up call to mainstream institutions that if you are getting outcompeted by individuals, there should be like a dark night of the soul, right? Like, and it's not because I think that I am better than the mainstream institutions. I just think that the relationship with the reader, with the viewer, is such that you need to attack these issues, attack your coverage in ways that meet them where they are and in a language that they speak. Like, it's no
Yes.
coincidence, Jen, that we're talking on video, right? Like, and now maybe it's
Yes.
incredibly obvious, but
Yes.
at a certain point, there's a historically highbrow way of doing this in which it is a voice from God and in which
Yes.
you're not litigating and standing up for your reporting in public
Exactly.
because it shouldn't be about individuals. But my lesson from this past year is that we're living at a time when you're competing for attention. And it is brutal. It is Mad Max in terms of like how do you
Absolutely.
stick with someone's algorithm? So having a face and a voice that people come to meet and want to spend time with. Every
Absolutely.
journalist is now a billboard. And it's not, look, I wouldn't wish this upon journalism from a blank slate perspective. It is tiring to be
Yes.
a promoter and a reporter at the same time. And some have said historically that those are in conflict. But I think that there is a reimagination of what it means to do journalism now because of how dire it is to support journalism. And so this is, as you experience with the contrarian, necessity is the mother of invention. That's how this stuff
Absolutely.
happens.
And I used to resist the notion that I was some kind of brand, but in the crass terms, that is what it is because you have to develop a relationship of trust that people know that they're going to get something of quality when they tune in or listen. We have covered so many big stories and big themes, which is really what we've tried to do here. We're not here to give you the scores, we're here to give you some context and some societal insight. I think one of the big overarching stories of the year has got to be women in sports. Aja Wilson, maybe the finest player of her generation in any sport. You have just the interest in women's sports, whether it's tennis, whether it's basketball. Where do you see the trajectory of women's sports? Do you see that it's crested, that it's going to continue to take off? Is this a matter of people reorienting their sports habits?
Yeah, I think that the biggest evolution in women's sports has been it went from, and this is a bit of a parallel, honestly, it went from a thing that got sold to you as a cause you should support
Yes.
because it's good for
Yes.
society to now just a real business.
Yeah.
And I think that is a bit of the through line so far in our conversation is that you can
Yeah.
appreciate this because it's important, but you should also appreciate it because it's going to make you money, that there is entertainment value in this thing that was once relegated to being like a should as opposed to a want to. And women's
Yes.
basketball, I mean, we're talking right now as the WNBA is at a labor standstill. They're
Yep.
actively negotiating, renegotiating the collective bargaining agreement, and they're haggling over a real question. And the real question is, how much is women's sports worth? And the answer, I mean, I can tell you right now that we've level reset. So now we're talking about, in the WNBA at least, we're talking about like 4 to 5 times as much as the last deal. That's like the
Right.
floor. That's like already kind of like the table stakes, which is crazy. That's
Yeah.
crazy. And when you think about NIL, which is a parallel conversation here, and you
Yep.
think about what it means to be, again, the language of the internet, what it means to be a creator with your own audience, you can now monetize audiences individually, which means that even if your sport isn't the NFL, you can support your sport and yourself and your colleagues and a whole structure and organization because there's enough people who want to pay to watch and pay you directly. And so it's just a different machine in terms of the economy of the internet and sports in general. And now it's a different, I think, social attitude around like, oh, wait a minute, maybe this is actually just good. It's a good TV show, let
Yeah.
alone something that's like, yeah, significant.
Absolutely. One of the other themes that we have looked at, of course, is what's happening to college sports and NIL, which seemed like a matter of just individual equity, is now in a manner of transforming college sports into something else. And we're not sure that something else is altogether good, but it is transforming it. College football being the best example, that it's become much more like pro football in that players move around, in that people have a monetary stake in the action. Um, Let me ask the most basic question. Do you like the changes in college sports?
Oh, what a fraught question. What I like is that finally, what is owed has begun to be paid, which is to say, we're talking about, on principle, a population of laborers who were
Yes.
never able to access the billions of dollars, especially in football and secondarily in basketball, but football more than anything, that effectively, if we're being honest, was funding everything else in college sports. That's how the
Absolutely.
sausage got made, and football players never got a piece of that. What I don't like, I would say, is the way in which this has been paid out so haphazardly without vision or really a plan. And so you think about like who's in charge, and the answer is it's not the NCAA because the NCAA was fighting this forever, and now they're in no position to be a fair broker in terms of like
Yeah.
how to actually admit, and they won't admit still that these players are also employees. Even in the NIL premise right now, we're talking
Yes.
about marketing money as opposed to salary. We're talking about essentially fees paid for advertising as opposed to contracts. And so there is so much to come in terms of whether these athletes will be treated and collectively bargained with as employees, which is why contracts will be, I think, the gravitational, obvious endpoint here. Like it's all going towards it because the only way to prevent the 24-hour, 365 chaos of the transfer portal, which is perpetual free agency, right? Which people hate,
Yes.
and understandably, they hate it. The only way to prevent that is with contracts. In which you have people there for a set amount of pre-negotiated, signed off time, and they're not there yet. And so I really like the principle that's being respected decades late, but I hate the fact that currently, from a federal perspective now, the person who's in charge of this happens to be Donald Trump, and he appointed like Triple H, the wrestler, to like run this stuff. So it's just it's a clown show. It's chaos. I get why people don't like it. I don't really like it, but it's necessary. And at some point, again, the through line here, you do what we should do, and then we figure out what is the best version of how to get what we want. And that's, I think, the order of operations when it comes to people not getting paid what they're due.
That is a interesting perspective that frankly I don't think I reached until you just said it, which is the chaos doesn't have to be coterminous with the payment to athletes. We're in a way station, and you can have a more sensible, more stable system and have athletes get paid. And right now, we're just in this free for all, you know, dodgeball kind of atmosphere. So that is a helpful and reassuring thought. Um, we would also be remiss if we didn't talk about the year that gambling kind of got out of hand, to put it mildly. Multiple gambling scandals. Can you put the genie back in the bottle? What's the way to maintain the integrity of sports without completely killing, if we can't do that, a multi-billion dollar business?
Yeah, I mean, the big picture story here is that sports, the economy of sports got disrupted. cable television was originally the fountain from which dollars were flowing. And now sports has turned to a couple of things that the federal government has also turned to crypto, the Middle East, and gambling. And so legalized sports gambling, which is to be now drilled in on your question, um, it is a mess. And I personally believe, and not to be the guy who says federal regulation is the answer to all of life's problems, but it feels like a thing that is sorely lacking here. And so when it comes to legalized sports betting, we're talking about incentives, right? You're talking about incentives and prop bets and these ways in which conflicts of interest can emerge, in which people with inside information can profit at the expense of people who don't have it. And
Right.
so those are the scandals. I mean, it's not terribly different from insider trading in that regard. It's not
It's
terribly
exactly what it
different
is.
from a meme coin and crypto that this government is using to make reportedly billions of dollars that people are otherwise not able to access either. So the question is, how do you limit the menu of prop bets? How do you regulate gambling federally? And how do you do that before it's too late? And I think the real trick bag that sports finds itself in is that the money is real and the money is good. And I don't think ethically, I'm of the position until further research, I'm of the position ethically where there can be federally legalized gambling if it's regulated. I just think that that conversation around how to get there is familiar to anybody who's studied politics. Like a
Absolutely.
scandal and fear and a panic and a crisis is how you get to that. And now I think it's safe to say the NBA and MLB have the attention of the Senate, of Congress, and sports because it's so popular it's also going to get attention in this way. It's politically useful to pay attention. And that's why I
Yes.
think next year is going to be a fascinating case study in how to regulate an industry.
Absolutely. And, it's interesting the parallel, as you say, to Middle Eastern money, to unregulated new ways of doing commerce, and to the lack of transparency, which is at the root of so much of our problems in politics and in sports. You know, you can get a little bit down on things. It's very popular to kind of be negative about sports or to bemoan the good old days. But we also had our share of transcendent moments and games and events this year. Um, I think for me, I'm wearing my blue and white,
I was
although
gonna
not
say I
darker
can
blue.
I can I can detect
Yes,
where this is headed.
yes, would be game seven and then Otani's magnificent game. When you look back on this year, give us a few of your high points in terms of feel good moments of either athletes who really deserved it or those athletes who overcame a psychological barrier to finally start winning.
Oh boy. I mean, we talked about a couple of them, just like these case studies and how to be gracious while also being great. People who overcame psychological struggles like Rory McIlroy, I think about
Yep.
finally getting that next major. I think about a guy, by the way, in terms of just like the young players that give me optimism, a guy like Victor Wembanyama, who is the San Antonio Spurs. International superstar who's already both physically, physiologically, as well as just as a voice, fascinating and interesting and precocious. And I love when he talks about the world. He seems to be an example of just like how to be um, uh, I'll use the word Catholic in a different way. Catholic in terms of just like welcoming of other perspectives, being curious about the planet. I just think that more of that is fascinating. But I will land, as much as it uh, pains me, on baseball. Because when you see playoff baseball, Jen, and I grew up watching baseball and I am still romantic about it in its clocklessness, when you
Yes.
see a game go to, a zillion innings, 19 innings, you just realize like why sports as entertainment is unparalleled. You
Yes.
can't script it, and in baseball, you can't even stop it. Like we
Yes.
are at the mercy of this thing that is bigger than us, that is communal, that is suspense on a level that makes every other genre of drama jealous. And so spontaneity, live events, presence, and unpredictability. These are ingredients in a nightmare as well as a dream. And in baseball,
Absolutely.
we got the good kind, and it's too rare to get the good kind.
Absolutely. I go back because we have, unfortunately, examples of the opposite to some sportsmen, sports people of the year who I think just conducted themselves in a way that makes you want to root for them, that restores your faith that sports is a game played within rules. And if you don't play them within those rules and you don't exhibit grace and generosity and humility, why play it?
Mm,
And for those, I would pick Tommy Fleetwood, who finally won a tournament, and it happened to be the biggest tournament of the year. And there wasn't anyone who wasn't thrilled for him, including, I think, his opponents, having fuel choked before so
yeah.
many times. And the other was one of my favorite sports is this emerging competition between Alcaraz and Sinner,
Yes.
two extraordinary young men who are playing a game so far above the rest of the field that you kind of look forward to an occasional tournament without one of them or both of them so that somebody else can win, but that they conduct themselves the way we all remember the greats, the Rod Lavers, the Ken Rosenwalds, the Stan Smiths, with dignity, with grace, self-control, generosity, and kind of a camaraderie that comes from, yeah, this is the other guy who I can really be pushed to my limit against. And I found that to be so refreshing at a time the sport was really struggling and thinking, gosh, we're losing these three guys, which is, of course,
Yeah.
Djokovic and Federer and Nadal. What are we going to do? And along comes these two guys, which kind of reminds you nostalgia's great, but something always does come along. There is always something great that is not comparable to the past, that it's simply the next iteration. And I found them so inspiring in that regard and kind of reassuring that good manners hasn't gone out of fashion, perhaps.
Yeah.
Sportsmanship hasn't disappeared.
There's also just like a fun juxtaposition in tennis this year. Like there's that on that level where it's like young people are gonna be all right.
Yeah,
A
exactly.
generally rare sensation as we survey our
Yes.
world. And then the other side, by the way, is a brief contrast. I don't know if we even talked about this, but the story of Bill Ackman entering that Challengers tournament,
Yeah.
basically buying his way into a professional tennis event and then being summarily humiliated. Andy Roddick called it the worst tennis event he's ever seen. I'm just reminded of the ways in which, again, wealth and money, they get used to get what rich, powerful billionaires think they can buy, only for them to be reminded that sports isn't like that. At its core, sports is resilient. Sports is a meritocracy. It's not a perfect one by any means, right? There are rigged aspects to it all over the place. But at its core, how difficult it is to be a pro athlete for real is a reminder of what money can't just buy. And that
Right.
story, in contrast to the just natural and genuine talents of Alcaraz and Sinner, it just felt like this total like mirror universe of like what you think sports can be and what it is, and how it's so much better to be, frankly, respectful and in love with sports for the right reasons.
Absolutely. And boy, isn't that the analogy? Money can't buy you class, respect, a historic legacy that you want. And that, of course, brings us back to, unfortunately, the person and the persona that kills everything he touches. Couldn't kill sports, but he certainly killed some events. When you look at Donald Trump, hogging in on the FIFA Club
Mm,
World Cup.
yeah.
I'll never forget Cole Palmer looking at him like, what the hell are you doing here? And his FIFA Peace Prize, which is really just a you can't get more ridiculous than that. Or you look at his appearances at sporting events and getting booed, whether it's the U.S. Open or whether it's the a football game in Washington. And yet we come in sports, just like we came, I think, in politics to realize, yes, everything he changes and touches is noxious, is corrupt, but he really can't ruin it because he doesn't have the power to destroy something that has such inherent appeal, inherent goodness. Democracy, sports, even a autocratic disaster, the hazmat cleanup, dump of personality can't entirely ruin it. And he kept popping up, but he really couldn't control it.
Yeah, he's testing it, to be clear. I mean, he is testing
Yes.
it in the way that he is just tattooing his name over the Kennedy Center, right? It's just like, oh, by the way, this is also just me. It's me. All of it's about me.
Yeah.
Um, and thankfully, um, it's sports is also a mechanism for, at its core, a democratic response. And one of the most long-standing democratic responses, small d democratic, populist responses, is just booing.
Yes.
And there
Yes.
are some instances where the people speak. And so whether it's at the Commanders game, whether it's at any of these events, the US Open, um, it's just a reminder that, you can pretend like you are the guy who everybody loves, but in sports, you actually get that tested also. And
Exactly.
I love that the crowd got to hold the most powerful person in imagination and in practice, unfortunately,
Yes.
in some amount of check.
Absolutely. Looking ahead to next year, and we'll kind of end on this. I am reminded, of course, that like anything else, we are part of a global community. And we're going to see the World Cup, and we're going to see as we march closer to the 28 Olympics, and whether this president, who has done so much damage internationally to the United States reputation and to just the peaceful interaction of people around the world, what impact he's going to have on that. So I think the face of international sports is one thing I'm going to have my eye on. What about you, Pablo? You have so many stories that you are following, that you are making news, but is there one broad theme that you're looking forward to in 2026 that you really want to see how it turns out?
For better and for worse, the story I will be following is a story that I've realized I've been covering this entire time, which is money.
Yeah,
I think that following the money takes you to the crossover between the Epstein files and sports, takes us to legalized gambling and those scandals. It takes us to the Clippers and aspiration again. It takes us to the World Cup, which is, again, as we've talked about before, a business development exercise as much as anything at this point in the eyes of FIFA and our president. Following the money is the thing. I mean, when you asked that question to start, like, did you really get into investigative journalism to, is that the whole sort of like thesis of your show? Um, it just frankly, it revealed itself to me that like,
yeah,
if you're not talking about that, you're missing what's really happening. And so
exactly.
I plan on following the money wherever it leads, and I have a sense it will lead to yeah, not just the highest and most shadowy corridors of power, but also the other countries that are deciding how to take over our democracy for their benefit.
Exactly. Exactly. Well, Pablo, one of the joys of this year that we've had as the Contrarian is getting to spend time with you. It's been such a pleasure. And when we had this crazy idea that we were going to do something about democracy, we had this equally crazy idea that you can't tell the story of democracy unless you're telling the story of culture, of sports, of so many other things. So you have been such a big part of our start, and we look forward to following you and learning from you and chatting with you and laughing with you in 2026. So we cannot thank you enough for being part of us. You are a true contrarian, and we don't say that to everyone.
Jen, it's been a pleasure every time we do this. I don't really know what we're going to talk about, but when we start, I realize that when they say that, politics is downstream of culture, that we do have a responsibility to make sure that, our reservoir, our drinking water is as clean as it can be. And so thank you for helping me in that mission.
Absolutely. Have a wonderful, wonderful holiday season, and we will see you in 2026. Take care, Pablo.
Bye bye.